Hello, everyone. I will be sharing my screen momentarily, but I want to say thank you. Thank you, Nicole Boston of the Society of Fire Protection Engineers, our board chair. Thank you, Kimberly Kaler from Advancing Organizational Excellence, this session's sponsor. We appreciate the work that you do. And certainly, I want to thank some of those persons behind the scenes. They are Liz, Demita, Chris, David, Stephen, and if I forgot anyone, please charge it to my head and not my heart, but know that everyone who worked to put this great conference together is appreciated. And I certainly thank all of you for being here. Thank you for your time. And I appreciate you coming to this Talkback Mic, shifting your culture one track at a time. So let's start with what's a Talkback Mic? Now, maybe some of you have been in the studio laying down the tracks to your latest and greatest hits. But for those of us who may not know a lot about the music industry, the talkback mic is that microphone that allows the engineer or the producer to talk to the talent in the booth. So talkback mics let us go back and forth and make some corrections. Now, Zoom doesn't allow us those freedoms. What I'd like to do is a workaround because I want to hear what you're saying. The way we can do that is in the chat. If I'm saying something that resonates with you, if I am saying something that gives you cause for pause and it gives you some thought, put it in the chat. Let me know what resonates. Let me know what you're thinking. I'm a product of the Black church. We're used to talking back to the preacher, right? So I want you to talk back and feel free to do that in the way that Zoom allows us. In the reaction setting, if I'm asking you questions and it applies to you and you agree, give me a thumbs up. Hopefully, we're all on the same page with that you'll participate in all the ways that you can. And now let's talk about why is it important to have a great culture? Well, you know, when you go into work, you want to meet with people and collaborate and be in teams that are giving great music. They're on the same note. They are having breakthrough procedures and they are far ahead of the competition. And when you have a great culture, that underlying mindset that is throughout your organization, it feels good to be in that space. And some of the things that we do to make sure we have a great culture, or at least I'd like for you to be convinced today, is to look at your recruiting, your learning and development, and your performance management. Those are the tracks on the records that we're looking at today. By the way, I do recognize that some of you in this Zoom room may be before the age of records, and some of you may not even understand what this picture that I'm going to show you is. I'll tell you in a moment. But again, welcome, welcome, and bonjour to my Quebec friends. Thank you for being here. Culture. Now, Talkback Mic, shifting your culture one track at a time. McKinsey states that culture is what people do and how they do it. What people do may differ a little bit from company to company, but high performing organizations distinguish their culture in the way and how they do things. Culture encompasses why do you do what you do? Culture, yes, that common set of behaviors and underlying mindsets. That's how we know that we're all singing the same tune, that we're all a part of that same great choir, our organizations. For today's presentation, I want you to think of this process in terms of songwriting and going in a studio to record those tracks on the records, which are shown here. Those items are what we use to play music before the age of, pardon me, iPods and streaming devices. The culture is the record and the tracks. Pardon me, I'm losing my voice. The culture is the record of the tracks. Each song on the record makes it complete. So McKinsey gives us 4 reasons why culture is important. Culture matters because culture correlates with performance. If you look at companies that are high performing companies, they perform 60% better than organizations who don't have a great culture. Culture is inherently difficult to copy. Do you remember Toyota and how everyone tried to copy what Toyota did, but they couldn't? It was part of the culture. McKinsey also states that culture in a healthy organization enables the organizations to adapt. When you can adapt, you can be more strategic. And then unhealthy cultures lead to underperformance. So now, and pardon me for my voice, unhealthy cultures lead to underperformance. And what are some examples of those unhealthy cultures? Well, think Enron, Wells Fargo, and Theranos. Now, this presentation deals a little bit with the music genre, and I'm walking you through the tracks to help your organization. So let's start with a little bit of trivia, and I call this trivia, Who Sang It? In the chat, you may have to help me out, Sarah, in the chat, because I can't see it right now. I want you to type in the chat which one of these artists sang Rated X. Okay, now let me see. What's your answer? Rated X. I got some Cardi B. I got some Prince. I see it now. So you guys think Rated X was sung by Prince? I'm going to take you through all of the songs before I give you the answers. Now, this should be an easy one. Who sang Papa Don't Preach? Okay. Now, this should also be easy for those of us over 35 or 40. Who sang Hound Dog? Now, what about the song She Bad? Who was the artist that sang She Bad? So let me give you the answers. And I saw like one person, I know one person that got this right. Rated X was Loretta Lynn. Did you get it right? Papa Don't Preach was Madonna. Erotic City, that was Prince. And yes, I see Jasmine Wallace, you said yes, Loretta Lynn. Matt, you got it right. She Bad, Cardi B. And then Erotic City was Prince. So now, what do all of these artists have in common? They were chastised for the music that they put out. Some of them were given what we call the side eye and raised eyebrows. There were protests with one of these artists. Yes, Nikki, the shock value of what they put out. And by the way, all of these artists are considered highly successful. Even one of these artists people tried to excommunicate her from the Catholic Church. And that's pretty serious around the music. Now, for the most part, music does unite. And yes, Julie Gordon, it was Madonna. They tried to get her out of the Catholic Church. Michael, yes, they are all disruptors. Funny you should say that, Michael, because this presentation started with me doing HR lessons from Cardi B. It was a Disrupt HR talk that I did in New York from a few years ago. I've adapted it for our needs today. And yes, Jasmine, okay, that's the Cardi B symbol. Now you're at home, you're on mute. Let loose a little bit. Let me hear your okay. We're going to have a little fun, but we're also going to give you some of the tracks to help get your culture shifted. Is that okay with everyone? Give me a thumbs up. Is that all right? Yes? Thanks, Sarah. Thank you, Karen. I see you, Sharon. Thank you for your participation. So let's talk about today's mix. What's on the radio today? Yeah, it's a Cardi B song. Yeah, that's something I know you do when you're recruiting. You're looking at candidates and they're saying things and you're kind of like, yeah. And then we want to talk about, I like it. I like it. Just because you like it doesn't mean it's good performance. So I like it is just not enough when you're forming or you have your performance review process. Are you with me? Are you going along this musical journey with me? Can I hear from you? Thanks, Kay Barnett. Thank you, Jennifer. I see you, Jerry. And then it's the finesse. Now, there's a special place in my heart for learning and development, and it does have a certain finesse. Finesse is that subtle smoothness. Now, Cardi B sings this song with Bruno Mars, and we know he's just smooth, right? But learning and development should be as smooth. It should be incorporated in your organizations with ease, but it should yield a big impact. All too often, this is an overlooked track. And of course, I've got to give you some bonus tracks. Kim Kaler talked about DE&I, and certainly I'm going to layer that in today. So let's start with the yeah. Have any of you, don't put it in the chat, just think about it, gone to your hiring manager or as a manager or as an HR leader said, I'm looking for the right fit? The right fit for this organization. But what if the organization needs a new melody? What if you need something else in that mix? Why would you place the same old notes on the same old track? The right fit doesn't help you make change. The right fit is the same old record. It indicates that you want more of the same versus what your team needs, what the organization needs to succeed. Now, look, when you're going to recruit, you want to go to the best schools, right? So let's imagine, go with me for a moment in your mind's eye. You are in a band, you're the leader, and now you're the drummer, but you lead the band, you want a singer. Or maybe you want a new dancer for the backup, right? And you say, I'm going to go to the best places. I'm going to go to Juilliard. I am going to the New England Conservatory of Music. And I'm going to look in all the right places. I want my candidate to come from the Upper East Side of New York. Or if you happen to be in Boston, you want them to come from Charlestown or Chelsea. If you're in Illinois, anybody here from Illinois? If you are, you want them to come from Naperville, or in Texas, Cinco Ranch, or maybe you're in Florida and you want them to come from Palm Valley. What do all those neighborhoods have in common? They're influential, but they're high income. And now, do you put this on your candidates? Do you say they have to come from a certain place? Do you ask where they live and then subconsciously or consciously make a decision about who they are? And you see that middle picture, maybe their background is not like yours. Maybe it's a little different. Maybe it's a bit disruptive, but you then judge them, right? You judge them. And yes, Tina, you limit your options. Thank you, Norma. I see you. And right. Thank you, Penny. Penny brings up a good point. Did you check their social media? Why? Does any of that have anything to do with, can they do the job? Are they willing to do the job? Now, listen, I will admit to you, I grew up in the Black church. I grew up listening to gospel. I grew up to listening to the blues. Cardi B wasn't on my top 20 playlist. And I was a little judgy. I looked, I'm like, Cardi B, not so sure. What about this language? I don't know about it. Yeah, judgy. Some of you think about your experiences when you're in a room. Are you judgy? Think about it. Tell me, well, you don't have to, but tell me if you're so inclined, where do you recruit? What schools do you consider the good schools? Do you always go to the schools that maybe you graduated from? Now, I love both of my alma maters, and I know that they've got great programs. But if we only had people who graduated from Purdue and University of Connecticut, we're limiting where we find talent, right? And now, I know you're visual. If you're looking at the second question, who has the best program? If you looked at that second question and immediately something came to mind, I want to stop you. Stop right there. Because just because someone has the best program, it doesn't mean that they have the people who are right for your organization at this time for this particular assignment. Think about it. Just because they have the best program, there are some other variables, there are other sounds that need to go into that record, right? And really, how do you determine best? So let me go back to the best program. I told you, I grew up on gospel and blues. But when I went to college, I got introduced to house music, house music, house music all night long. I love house music, right? But I also increase the genres that I look at. Yes, I'm a little bit country and I can be a little bit rock and roll. For those of you not from that era, that's the Osmonds, right? I was shopping in Lowe's a couple of weeks ago, and then there was a DJ spinning in Lowe's. It was great. Loved it. They make you buy more because you're listening to music. We happened to get to the checkout, and the song that came on, are you ready for it? B-52's Love Shack. I love Love Shack. Me and the guy checking us out dancing to B-52's Love Shack. Now listen, that's what you need. Different genres, appreciation of other areas, not just what you're used to doing. So let's talk about, oh yes, Jasmine Wallace, love me some Shania Twain. Yes. And I don't know if I do Megan the Stallion, a little something maybe. But I do Oak Ridge Boys, right? I do a little Bach, a little Beethoven. You've got to reach out past what you're used to. Oh, Danielle, Silk Sonic. Don't get me, Shelly. Don't get me off task. We've got a keynote to deliver, but Earth, Wind, and Fire, yes, ma'am. So listen, why do we need a new tune? Why? Well, I'm glad you asked. We need a new tune because to be homogeneous in the workspace, or another word for that is homologous. Homologous is having similar or underlying biology, the same or relative position or value. Well, what happens when that occurs? Well, let's start by looking at some headlines. Scientific American, I'm thinking some of you may have read or do read Scientific American. Now, I looked at this headline by Michael Truong, and it says, we must confront anti-Asian racism in science. That caught my attention, and maybe some of yours. There's anti Asian racism in science? Well, yes. And the studies from Stop Asian American Pacific Islander Hate national report says, this was just last year, between March and August of 2020, there were 2,500 reported incidents against Asians. Now, all of us should know that that's probably underreported because people were afraid to go to the authorities or they just didn't want to be bothered. Now, I want to give you Michael's words from this article. When news of these attacks became public, my friends warned me to be alert and careful when I was anywhere outside my home. Now, those of you who may not be in some of these other intentionally marginalized groups may not understand that, but you're living day to day and afraid to go outside of your home. Michael goes on to say that at the beginning of the pandemic, mask wearing was not required, but to protect people and himself from spreading the coronavirus, it was something that he wanted to do. He works in a laboratory, he's on a campus, but he didn't. He didn't put on a mask because he was scared that coworkers and colleagues might avoid or harass him. His family and friends cautioned him to don't stay out too late. And now those of us in the Black community, we know that that's in our history. We call those sundown communities. Don't get caught out after dark, because the reality of it is they could kill you. Michael in this article says that his family and friends kept warning him. He endured limitations and he did not finish a lot of his experiments and his work because he was afraid of being out. Now, what if he was about to come up with the next great vaccine? What if he was about to come up with the next great product or innovation? He said he had to endure these limitations against Asians worldwide. It heightened his anxiety, but he kept quiet. He kept quiet about his concerns in the lab because he thought speaking up would make him the butt of jokes at his workplace, at a school, in a lab. Now, what has happened far too often, we think of Asians as the model minority. Well, they've succeeded. They shouldn't have. There's no racism against Asians. But I'm here to tell you, it's a broken record, but it's there. Now, this next headline, is entitled "Deep Biases Prevent Diverse Talent from Advancing." Now, it's from the Smithsonian. Now, this original article by Karina Howley of EOS, she talks about diversity in science leading to innovation. And innovation leads to career success, right? A lot of you are successful because you're innovators, because you're smart, because you show up every day and you bring it, right? You're the lead singer wherever you are. But what happens to students from diverse backgrounds who may have that same talent, and the article says that studies show that underrepresented, by the way, I'll deal with that term later, but underrepresented scholars in science-related fields are more likely to innovate. They're also less likely than the majority group to earn influential academic positions. Let me say that again. If you're a minority in a science-related field, you're more likely to innovate and less likely to get ahead and be recognized for it. The authors call this the diversity innovation paradox. What researchers found was that students' racial and gender groups, if they were less represented in their field, then they were less likely to get ahead. For instance, if you happen to be an African American in a predominantly white field, it's less likely that you're going to get ahead, but it's more likely that you have novel conceptual linkages. Again, this is a quote from the article, novel conceptual linkages. That means that you have meaningful concepts in your theses, that you have a higher rate of innovation because of your unique perspectives and experiences. The same goes for women in a male dominated industry. They're less likely to get ahead, which brings me to the third depiction. It's from the Harvard Business Review. I have some issues with Harvard. However, and the issues stem from the payments of students to get in, some unfairness, but we can move past that today because they still have some salvageable, relevant, factual content. And this article, if the women in the room today, you know that you've got to overcome hurdles in your profession to just get ahead. You know that there are some subtle and not so subtle stressors. You know that there's some microaggressions that happen in the workplace. This article tells us women are leaving engineering fields in disturbingly high numbers. What can we do? What songs can we play? What's the track that we start to turn this thing around? Well, let's start with recruiting. I need you to remix your job descriptions. Check and see if the job descriptions are neutral. What do I mean by that? Gender neutral. Is the language in your job description male dominated so it inherently brings more men? But that some of you have some organizations that have a lot of females. So are you continuously putting out job descriptions that continuously bring females? And now you're not looking at some males that contribute to the environment. I am concerned that we are doing the same thing, playing the same tune, playing the same song over and over and over again. So listen, gender neutral. There is a free source that I like to use called Gender Decoder, and it's free. You put in your job description, they'll tell you if it's male or female dominated. So then you go back and you change some of that language, because even if it's unintentional, it's still being done. How else can you remix your job descriptions? Hone in on the competencies. What does it take to do this particular job? Not the nice to haves, not what you think you have that's great. What are the competencies? Now, I like to use the text for your improvement, which I also use for coaching, from Korn Ferry. They list competencies and they also list what it looks like to be in that space and assessing those competencies. We use in our organization the A method of hiring, right? Linking the competencies in the job descriptions to the questions you ask in the interview. And by the way, thank you, Sarah. She listed the Gender Decoder link in case some of you want that. Now, there are other paid services that you can use to also neutralize the language for race and ethnicity and age. Look those up, but start with the free source. Hone in on the competencies. And this is one that's really, it's that tune that when I hear it, it's a little off key. That tune of they need 7 years of experience, but you're having them do filing and administrative work. Why do they need 7 years of experience? Make it make sense. So think about why we're doing things and not play the same tune over and over again. Question it. I want to give you a story that some of you may have heard. There's a woman who was baking a ham, and she would slice the end of the ham off, put it in her pan, put it in the oven, and have a lovely baked ham for dinner. Her son asked her, "Mom, why do you cut the ham off at the end?" She's like, "I don't know. My mom always did it." So she goes to her mom and says, Mom, why do you cut the ham off at the end when you cook it? And she says, I don't know. My mom always did that. So they go to the grandmother and say, Grandma, why do you cut the ham off when you put it in the oven? And she says, because we never had a pan big enough to cook it all at once. Are we still doing things that don't make sense for the tools that we have today, for what we know today? Are we singing the songs that are out of tune? I just think about it. Look at your job descriptions when you go back. Second thing, in recruiting, I want you to press for more bandwidth. Let's talk about the progression of music for a minute, or at least the tools that we use to listen to music. Let's start off with the record, those black discs that I showed you in the beginning. We put a needle on the record and it would play a song. If there was a scratch, you heard or the song would repeat. But then we went to 8 tracks, this big bulky thing that went in. Then we went to a smaller tape. But then there was the invention of the iPod. I think now I'm down some of your lanes. You might have remembered the iPod, even if you don't know about the 8-track. But then we made the shift to streaming, right? And now we've got Alexa and Google, who we can just say, hey, Alexa, play whatever our song is, right? But you now have to have more bandwidth to play those songs, to download them, which wasn't even a word before, download them on your computer. So in expanding, pressing your bandwidth, I want you to first change your language. It's not underserved communities or schools. Sorry, Penny, I knew somebody's Alexa would go off. Underserved communities, let's say historically excluded, right? Because that's really the truth. The truth of the matter is they're not just underserved. Some of this was intentional. It's not just underrepresented. Do you remember the headline where one executive said that he couldn't find any Black people to fill these roles? Well, and I may have the number off. Somebody correct me in the chat. I'm okay with that. Beyonce found, was it 40 trombone players? If Beyonce can find 40 trombone players, you can certainly find an Asian, a Latina, a differently abled, an international candidate, right? Was it 42 trombone players? Thank you, Demita. So trust me when I say, if Beyonce can do it, you can too. So change your language. It's not underserved. It's historically excluded. It's not underrepresented. It's intentionally marginalized. And then I want you to think about major scale. Now, major scale in music means that the music is consistent. In recruiting, I want there to be consistency in your job descriptions, when you're asking questions, and when you are assessing candidates, there needs to be consistency. If it is in the job description and you've listed the competencies, what songs are on that track, they should show up in the performance review, and they then should show up when you look at learning and development. Are you with me? Are we going on this musical journey together? Let me hear. Am I hitting home? Is there anything that you can grasp? Thank you, Shelley. Thank you. Is it Virgie, Alyssa, Julie, Leslie, Tina, Cynthia? Thank you, Amy. So now we've talked a little bit about recruiting, and please know, a lot of these topics I could do individual sessions on, but let's go and get to performance management. I like it. You've written the song, the job description, you found your lead singer, and now you need to see if they can go platinum. But just because you like it doesn't mean it's enough. Now, my husband changed my language for this portion. I wanted to say these songs that I'm going to give to you are just horrible. I shouldn't, because that's me being judgy again. Let me say they're not in my particular genre and what I like. If you haven't heard it, look it up. The Real Housewives of DC. Michaela Salehi's song. She has a song called Bump It. Not my cup of tea. Real Housewives of Atlanta, Cherie Whitfield, has a song, Who Gon' Check Me, Boo? So I can tell you, for me, their performance is not that great. But if you make an assessment in performance, you need to have the reasons. You need to have the key performance indicators. You need to know that they are here doing the job assigned, that they are hitting the mark, right? Now, I want you to read, in what used to be in the records, there was fine print. And we talked about people coming from the good schools, people with the great degrees, but I need you to read the fine print. Who in here, give me a thumbs up if you know who Elizabeth Holmes is. Thumbs up, anybody? Who knows who is Elizabeth Holmes? Carmen, Danielle, Alfred, okay. Okay. Nikki, you guys know who Elizabeth Holmes is. Claudia, the turtleneck. She tried to pattern her career after Steve Jobs. So let me tell you a little bit about Elizabeth Holmes for those of us who may not know the story. She was the CEO of Theranos. It was marked as a health technology company. Now, there's a Forbes article about Elizabeth Holmes. This Forbes article, and by the way, you can go to biography.com, CNBC, all over the news. She had the valuation of a company soar to $9 billion. That's with a B, $9 billion. Then what happened was there was a series of reports that said that her technology was faulty. Okay. Maybe there was one report, two reports, no, multiple reports. Then it came out that 7.5 million of the tests that her company conducted were inaccurate. Think about it. Those of you who work in labs, those of you it might be in healthcare or in those industries, or for that matter, in oil and gas, right? Those industries where accuracy is key. That's a problem. Well, now her and her partner, Ramesh Balwani, are indicted on 11 federal charges, including wire fraud and conspiracy to commit wire fraud. Now, what went wrong in this performance? What went wrong in her performance? In that Forbes article that I mentioned earlier, so her parents were friends with their next door neighbor who happened to be a psychiatrist and a former CIA agent. And he characterizes Holmes as someone who had less than stellar grades, not very impressive, and her parents tried to backdoor her into Stanford. We've heard that before, right? She eventually got into Stanford. Her parents had her take a Mandarin class so it would be impressive on her resume, on her background. She got into Stanford, chemical engineer. And she dropped out after the first year. She founded this company, but how did she get there? Well, in this report, it states that a very influential person knew her, introduced her because, again, of her legacy, her parental connections, the name of the school, this good school, gets her a meeting with a venture capitalist so that she can start Theranos. She gets this meeting because the guy said, oh, she's attractive. Let me meet with her. I'm not making this up. Read the Forbes article. So she gets into Stanford with less than stellar grades, chemical engineer for only a year, knows nothing or almost nothing about science as reported. I don't know her personally. And then she has legacy of a power father who knows people, and she was attractive. $9 billion because parents had privilege and she was attractive. So now, And I'm going to leave you with this on performance as far as talking about Elizabeth Holmes. That last point is legacy. I talked about her dad being influential and high-powered executive. Put in the chat, does anybody know what company her dad worked for? Talk to me. Talk back to me. Anybody know what company? Nobody? It was Enron. Yes, Demita, Enron. I'll leave that there. Let's talk about performance management as a sonata. Now, sonatas typically occur in classical music. It's a musical form with 3 sections, and it explores a central theme. So, any classical music people in the room? I know my mom would say, hey, I want you to listen to Bach, Brahms, Beethoven. And I did, and it was wonderful, but I didn't necessarily deep dive into classical. So here is just, and Danielle, you can correct me. It's okay. If I say something that's a little off. And Penny, love Bach, yes. The performance management as a sonata. Let's first talk about the exposition. The exposition in music is just that first major section in the sonata. The first major section in performance management is you. You as a leader are responsible for helping craft or remix the job description and the onboarding. And the exposition includes creating an environment that's safe. It's reducing the threat response so people are okay to fail and learn from that. It's leading with compassion. That's you, the exposition, the beginning of this sonata, the leader's responsibility. Gallup has a report that says 50% of employees know what is expected of them. 50%. Think about your organization. If you're in an organization of 500 people, there's 250 people potentially walking around that have no idea what's expected of them. Performance management is that. You've got to guide, you've got to lead, you've got to develop. And development is that second section. It is having the conversations that are structured to say, here's what I want you to start doing. Here's what I want you to keep doing. And here's what I want you to stop doing. You state the specific action, event, or behavior, the impact of that behavior. You start with, I want to encourage you to do this or this. That's called the SKS method. Start doing, keep doing, or stop doing. Or there's the Sbi method, the situation, the behavior, and the impact. So you describe the situation. What's the behavior that you see? And what's the impact of that behavior? Structure the way you speak to people so that they can digest it, so they can listen to the melody, right? And I then want to talk about the ending. This is where there's the harmonic goal of closure. It starts with the recap and reminds you of what just went on. When you do this last step in a performance review, what you're going to do is say, now this is what we're going to do to move forward. You give specific and measurable items. You talk about, this is how we're going to upskill you. This is what I want you to keep doing and why, and this is how we're going to support you. Does that make sense to you? Is this music resonating with you guys? Okay, thank you. So now let's talk about opus. This is part of a composer's collection of work. So you've got an entire collection. And what happens is the first piece of music is called opus 1. And then it goes chronologically from there, opus 1, 2, 3, 4, right? You're putting together the pieces of your employees' performance. You want more frequent feedback. You want to use a clear framework like the ones that I've mentioned or others. You solicit feedback from the employee. What are they thinking? How can you help shift and get them to be the lead singer? You want to include development and a learning path. and create an environment that is a safe space for learning and fair. If it's not fair, you won't be able to play that beautiful music, and it will be a broken record. You're not going to have the trust that you need. And an organization that's got a broken record, you'll see some microaggressions and some implicit bias. Take a moment to read that. There's something called a trust triangle. And the trust triangle has three drivers. It's authenticity, logic, and empathy. I'd love to deep dive into it. However, no, we're winding down. We're getting to the last track. So let me move a little bit faster through this. Let's talk about the trust issues. A pizzicato is a playing technique, a way of doing something. For our purposes, it's your process. If you have a process and your people know about it, if you have a pizzicato and they recognize it, they may not agree, the employees, you may not agree with the outcome, but if the process is fair, then it'll be okay. The overture is that musical piece that comes at the start of a larger work. So when I walk into your organization, for me, the overture, your culture speaks loudly. That's the overture. How are people treating each other? How are they making decisions? Is there a wonderful hum and a melody? You can almost feel it. And the pew is more. If you can build a culture of trust, employees will engage with you more. They'll be more strategic. They will give you more energy. They will give you more than what you've asked for. You see the picture on this slide? Charlie Brown, waiting to kick the football. To this day, if I see that, I'm like, no, she's gonna take the ball away. Poor Charlie Brown. But are we doing that in our organizations? Are we taking the ball away? Are we playing different notes, different tunes, and the melody is not harmonious? Think about it. When you have a broken record, you also have microaggressions. Now, this slide is a part of everyday life implications for clinical practice from Daryl Wing Sue and a host of other researchers. It is a peer-reviewed research item, and it was back in 2007, but trust me when I say it is relevant today. It is relevant because we are still hearing, when I look at you, I don't see color. Or when I walk into a space and there's a story of a high ranking executive who walks in a space to give a talk, a meeting at a conference, and they walk her through the kitchen and ask where she's going to be serving. It still happens. It's prevalent. It's an issue. It is something that we're watching now. The world is watching. Medical news lists 3 forms of microaggressions. The forms of microaggressions can be verbal. I'm saying something. Here are a lot of those examples here. It's behavioral. It's walking down the street and seeing someone of a different color, race, and clutching your bag and moving to the other side. Or behavioral in, I'm going to interview this candidate over this one. May have same qualifications, but they may be of different ages, right? Or different race. Microaggressions. It is, you're such a credit to your race. What? Really? That's saying that I'm not as intelligent as you are. And we know everyone has that capacity. There are three types of microaggressions: micro assaults, micro insults, and micro invalidations. Now, I have to tell you, I do an entire presentation just on microaggressions and implicit bias. We can't deep dive, but what I do ask that you do is read up on it. I ask that you pay attention to what's happening in your organizations, in your communities, and in the world. I didn't explain the last one, the microaggressions that are environmental. Microaggressions that are environmental, what does that look like? It is students of color walking around their universities and having statues of people who killed their ancestors. That's what that looks like when there's a microaggression that's environmental. Now, there's an entire study on this. I don't know if Sarah has that link right now. We're down to about 30 minutes. But if you have that link and people want to look it up, please put that in the chat. Thank you. And then there's the implicit bias. Implicit bias isn't always directed at someone. It's not always malice, but it does always do harm. And it may not be aligned with what you say you believe, right? But we see this whether you're in science, engineering, education, it happens. And why is implicit bias important to you? Why? Because it gets hectic. It gets hectic when you have models walking down the runway with a noose around their necks. It gets hectic when you have an oxygen machine. People's lives depend on it. But if you're a Black or brown person, this machine may not work accurately. It's advertisements that glorify women being in the kitchen and not necessarily in the laboratory or in government or in the boardroom. It is arresting business professionals at a Starbucks because they're Black. It is releasing researchers from Google because they challenge the way AI will bring data when it's people of color. That's when bias gets hectic. It gets hectic when it's people over 50 who are pushed out of their roles because they're not valued for their knowledge, right? Bias gets hectic. And now it's more than hectic. It's more than a bad note. It's life or death. Black women and American Indian or Alaskan Native women are dying. They're dying because of bias in healthcare. I'm recognizing my time. I want to get to learning and development because I need you to understand that. But some of the things that I've said, reach out for yourself, notice what's going on, remember the biases, understand your own implicit bias. Harvard has a test you can do. I urge all of you to listen to the On Being podcast with Rizma Menachem, who is the author of Grandmother's Hands, and Robin DiAngelo, who's the author of White Fragility. There is a podcast called On Being. I encourage, and thank you, Sarah. On Being, Danielle, she put the link in the chat. Let's move on to finesse, learning and development. Learning and development should be the culture in your organization. If you don't grow and learn, you can't be better. If you're not upskilling, if you're not training your employees, they may be looking for an exit. So those of you who have Alexa, play some bebop. Bebop music is that jazz sound from like Dizzy Gillespie and Count Basie. But what it is to me today is that I want you to begin with your learning and development by assessing it. So often we'll say, well, this person needs to go to training. This person, I knew it. Um, but listen to the bebop, it's wonderful. This person needs to go to training. But have you done an assessment? Do an assessment of what really is needed, right? I want you to evaluate the level of learning. If you need somebody to understand something, that's very different than you needing them to be able to um, create and innovate. Look up Bloom's taxonomy of learning and understand and evaluate the level of learning that you need. I then want you to build a learning plan with your stakeholders, organize the launch, and plan the evaluation and the feedback loop. Again, I could deep dive into all of this, but I want you to bebop your learning and development. And that key is the assessment. And you all, if you're scientists, you work with scientists, you know, you've got to identify the problem. And that's typically where other problems start, because you misidentify the problem. Identify the problem. Why is that the problem? Come up with your hypotheses. But do you have the right people in the room to make that decision? Who's not at the table? Ask that question. Who's not at the table? So some of those ads I showed you before, that oxygen machine, who was not at the table when those decisions are being made? Test. How do you test it? Conversations, work assignments, and then you analyze it. Observe the competencies. Is what you put in place work with your learning and development? And by the way, have you prepared for all the types of learners? Have you prepared for rap, country, blues, classical, gospel? Have you prepared for the varying needs of the learner? People who have disabilities or differently abled, they need to learn in a different manner. Maybe there's a hearing concern. Maybe there's a cognitive issue. But there is the universal design of learning. And I got this from a friend at UConn. She's a doctor in physics. And she did this presentation, and I found it so engaging. And again, this could be a presentation in and of itself. But with learning and development, think about not the average person coming into the room or the average person employee. Think about the variations. What do they need to learn? How can you upskill them? What can you do so that they are the best lead singer, they're the best choir member for your organization, right? And when that happens, we see that. We see that in design, door handles versus doorknobs. It's thinking about products and items and innovation songs that are universal, right? It's we are the world, basically. So let's talk about back to Cardi B. Cardi B has Bodak Yellow. It sold more than 10 million copies. She was the first female rapper in history to get RIAA certified diamond status. That means it went platinum 10 times. She was disruptive. They said she wouldn't be successful. She didn't fit the background for success. But yet here she sits, 2021, $40 million of net worth. What I want to do is Bodak Yellow your organizations. I don't want you to be Blockbuster or Toys R Us or Sears. Blockbuster went out of business not because of Netflix. Blockbuster went out of business because of Blockbuster. They didn't have the right people. They didn't have the right systems and processes. They didn't lay down the right tracks to be successful. Toys R Us wasn't watching the competition. If we've engaged our employees and we've gotten rid of some of the broken records and they're engaged in what we do and how we do it, and the culture has that positive mindset that's aligned with our mission and vision, we move forward. Sears used to be the #1 retailer. You could get ovens and homes. Yes, you could buy a house from Sears. Where are they today? I want your organization to be platinum 10 times over. I want a Bodak yellow, your organization. Okay. So now let's make some money moves. What are those money moves? According to a Career Builder survey, 30% of an individual's first year of expected earnings is what it costs you if they're not engaged, right? There's another survey that says it's $3,400 from Gallup. That's for every $10,000 of what they make. So hear me clearly. It's the right thing to do. It's the thing that we should all be doing because of humanity. It is where we are in this world to be collaborative, to be team oriented. But if that's not enough for you, if you don't buy into that song and that's not your genre, let's say you need to make money moves, and you need to do this because you're losing money if you don't have the foundation in recruiting, in learning and development, and performance management that are solid and fair processes, and you're getting rid of the broken records of implicit bias, of microaggressions, and lack of trust. And I would be remiss if I did not bring to your attention the cultural effects and the pandemics of COVID-19 and politics. COVID-19 pushed us to new melodies. And if you are looking to go back to normal, you've missed it. You've missed the song. You've missed the harmony, because it's no going back. It's moving forward. What have we learned from shifting the business, from shifting the notes, from playing a different tune? What have we learned that we need to do in our organizations? What have we learned from televised murders? What have we learned from uprisings from a people who are being harmed, from a people who have PTSD from the things that maybe some of us go out among our day and never worry about? You can go out grocery shopping and not have to worry about if you come back alive or not. But the cultural effects of the pandemics affects your organization. And if you release that grand statement and you talked about singing a new day and a new dawn, you then did nothing, said nothing. You released that one statement about George Floyd and how we feel for you and we're allies, but nothing else happened. Not only are Black people watching, Asian people are watching, Caucasian people are watching, women are watching, because you have not stepped up to the music. You have not come to play the right songs, and it's recognized. If that is the case, there'll be turnover. There'll be disgruntled employees. Yes, Demita, the performative acts are doing your organization a disservice. Because if you had the language and the beautiful statement, you updated your mission statement, but you're not supporting communities of color, you're not holding sessions in the Asian community about the attacks and how you're going to support them, you're not remixing your job descriptions and increasing the bandwidth, then it is for nothing. Your learning and development needs to have a budget. If you don't have a budget, you're not serious. And in your learning and development, have you put in some of the DE&I seminars, learning sessions, and other activities? And then there's politics. I don't care if you're Republican. I don't care if you're Democrat, Green Party, or Independent. The politics divided a nation, divided a world. There are protests in France. There are protests in China. There are protests in America, and we are divided. What has your organization done to bring us together, to bring us back, to say we can all collaborate, and there's more connecting us than dividing us. So I bring you to the tuning fork. I don't know if we have time for a few minutes of breakout. Sarah, unmute me and I can just keep going and end the session and be available for questions, I think, if that works better.
Whatever works for you, Deirdre.
Okay. So I don't want to take the time now to get you into a room, to get you back so we can talk about it. Let's talk about it here. Tuning fork. What can your organization do better? And how will you personally advocate for change or change the way you do things? So let me give you a summary information slide. We're not going to break out, but what we can do, and I don't want you to give away the company secrets. It can be some easy things. With recruiting, if that's something you choose, how can you change your job descriptions based on what you may have heard today? What schools can you recruit at outside of what you've already done? Now, remember, this is our tuning fork. We're going to get pitch perfect. We're going to get back on key. If it's performance management, what's your exposition look like? Are you creating a safe environment? And what that means is, are you allowing employees to fail and not chastising them and not ostracizing them, but helping correct them with development and those paradigms that I gave you? In the learning and development, are you sending people to learning sessions and saying, well, I don't know why they aren't performing. I sent them to this class. Maybe it wasn't a class that they needed. Maybe it was coaching. Maybe it was they've got a personal issue and they needed to talk to HR to figure out the benefits. You've got this. I know you do. You understand about the process. You understand how to deep dive into a problem to find solutions. But what I challenge you to do is have those courageous conversations. Conflict can feel uncomfortable, but if you're not uncomfortable, you're not growing. Be uncomfortable in that space. Be kind, be compassionate, deal with everyone in humanity, but still have those conversations. What I'm seeking to do today is to get your organization on fleek. Now, anybody in the chat understand that colloquialism, being on fleek? Talk to me if you do. Let's tell everybody what's fleek, right? Okay, fleek is on point. Yes, Stephen, it is hot. It is doing things and you know you're good, right? But to do that, I want you to on up on Miss Notes. I want you to have some new sheets of music and paradigms. What are you going to do differently in recruiting and learning and development and performance management? I want you to find out find out your biases and work towards changing them. You can change your biases. The mind is flexible. Okay, you can eliminate your microaggressions, but you've got to work at it. I want you to learn to be patient in the process. Change what needs to happen. And don't just think everyone has a magic wand and it's going to change overnight. Be patient in the process. It takes time. And yes, I'm talking to you, manager who calls HR 3 days after the job description and says, well, who do you have for me to interview? Be patient in the process, okay? I want you to evaluate, go away from this talk today, the Talkback Mic, right? Shifting your culture one track at a time. I want you to go back, look at one cacophonous or out of tune area in your organization. How are you going to participate in fixing it? How are you going to be a partner and collaborate? Evaluate the cacophonous area, right? How are you going to reach out to people over 50? How are you going to reach out to those people who are differently abled? How are you going to welcome your international employees who may have different cultures, right? Home cultures than you, but your culture needs to be one of welcoming, one of learning, right? And then I want you to do the evaluation. I want you to endure the difficult conversations. So now you've gone through this process, create a plan. So know that if you don't create a plan, it's just a dream. Do the work. And I want you to keep vigilant about fixing the broken records. This is not a one and done. You don't go into the studio, put one record, and then retire. You don't do that. Think of your favorite artist. Even when they say, I'm retired, a lot of them have come back for their best and latest, greatest hits. I need you to be on fleek. Say it with me. Okay. So listen, that's my time. I know we have a few moments. I skipped over the poll. I skipped over the breakout rooms because I wanted you to get this information. Here are the citations from this presentation, and I'm going to stop sharing, and then I'm going to ask you, does anyone have questions? Do you have comments? Can I really open the Talkback mic and hear from you? We've got about 7 or 8 minutes. Talk to me. Talk back.